You're under federal investigation, Dad. The board voted. You're out. That was the moment my world tilted. My son, my own flesh and blood, said it into the microphone standing in front of 300 employees, investors, and reporters. His voice didn't even shake. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward, and I felt every lens cut into me like glass. He stood there in his $5,000 Navy suit, jaw clenched like a movie star, pretending to hold back emotion. This was a hard decision. Evan continued glancing toward me, but for the sake of the company and our family's reputation, we had to act. Our family's reputation. He said it like he was protecting me. Like this wasn't a public execution disguised as leadership. The crowd whispered. Some avoided my eyes. Others just stared. Behind him stood Lydia, his wife. 33, stunning, always dressed like she'd stepped off a luxury magazine cover. She had tears in her eyes, the kind that sparkle but don't fall. The kind that belong to liars. Richard's been showing signs of confusion, she said softly. He's been making mistakes with company funds. The board believes he needs rest, not pressure. Rest. They called it rest. I called it what it was, removal. Behind me, the banner read, Mallory Infrastructure Annual Shareholders Meeting. The company I built from 2 men, 1 truck, and a rented garage. 42 years of concrete steel and sleepless nights. The empire that bore my name, Mallory. And here I was being erased from it, one press conference at a time. When Evan stepped off the stage, he didn't even look at me. He walked straight into a swarm of cameras, shaking hands, smiling like a man who'd just conquered Everest. The reporters called after him, Mr. Mallory Jr. What happens next? Will your father face charges? Charges. That word hung in the air like poison gas. I turned to look at Lydia. She gave me a pity smile, the same smile you give to a dying pet. Then she leaned in close enough for only me to hear. It's time to rest, Richard. You've had your turn. I didn't reply. I just watched her walk away in her red-soled Louboutin's arm, hooked through my son's. That image burned into me like acid. You ever have a moment when you realize the person you die for would rather see you destroyed, because that's exactly where I stood that morning, in the glass atrium of my own headquarters, surrounded by people who once called me sir. My name is Richard Mallory, 74 years old. Founder, builder, soldier, husband, father. I survived 2 recessions, 3 hostile takeovers, and 40 years of hard men who thought they could outsmart me. But I never expected the knife to come from my own bloodline. The next day, every headline read, Mallory founder accused of corporate fraud. Son takes over amid scandal. By noon, my company email was disabled, my parking badge canceled, and my nameplate removed from the boardroom door. That's when I understood this wasn't just business. It was war. And I wasn't going to lose the last battle of my life to a boy who thought money made him powerful. I drove home to my penthouse in silence. The kind of silence that hums louder than any crowd. Outside, the Dallas skyline shimmered in the heat, bright and untouchable. Inside, I poured myself a glass of bourbon and looked out over the city I'd built. All right, son, I whispered, raising the glass to the window reflection. You want the empire? Then you'd better be ready to face the man who built it. Because one thing I learned, after 74 years on this earth, when you betray a man who's got nothing left to lose, you've already lost. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Because sometimes betrayal doesn't come from enemies, it comes from the people who share your last name. 3 days after that press conference, my signature vanished from every document that mattered. Bank accounts frozen, email access revoked, company phone disconnected. I wasn't fired. I was erased. A courier arrived at my door that morning with a manila envelope marked Urgent Legal Notice. Inside were 50 pages of accusations, money laundering, fraud, misuse of pension funds, all stamped with the company seal, all signed by my son, Evan Mallory, CEO. I read every word. They'd built the story well, too well. Someone had used my digital signature, even fabricated correspondence where I supposedly approved offshore transfers. There were screenshots, forged, audit trails, even emails sent from my account at 3 a.m. when I was asleep. At the bottom of the stack sat one letter, effective immediately. Richard Mallory is suspended pending investigation. No dad. No love. Just a sentence that cut 40 years of my life clean in half. By noon, the media had parked outside my penthouse. Neighbors avoided eye contact in the elevator. Even the doorman called me Mr. Mallory, sir, like I was already guilty. That evening, Lydia showed up wearing all white, smelling like jasmine and guilt. "Richard," she said sweetly, "Evan didn't want to do this, but you left him no choice." The investors were worried. I laughed. A slow, heavy laugh that startled her. "The investors, or you?" She smiled the way a cat does before killing a bird. "Honestly, Richard, you've been slipping. Maybe it's time you focused on your health. Evan's just trying to protect the company. Protect. That's what they called it when they stripped me of everything." I leaned against the bar counter and said, "You know what the funny thing about age is, Lydia?" She tilted her head, curious. "It teaches you how to spot snakes long before they strike." Her face hardened. "That's cruel." "So is betrayal." She left without another word, the echo of her heels slicing through the marble like a metronome counting down to war. 2 days later, my lawyer called, voice tight. "Richard, there's been movement on your accounts. The Mallory Family Trust has been amended. Your voting shares are being reassigned." "To whom?" I asked. He hesitated. "To your son." Permanently. The trap had closed. They'd used my own wealth to buy out my legacy, locking me out of every decision I'd ever made. That night I sat in the dark of my study, surrounded by framed photos of a life that suddenly felt like fiction. Rose, my late wife, smiling in the garden. Evan at 6, covered in mud, holding his first toy bulldozer. How did we get from there to this outside Dallas, flickered through the rain, neon and lonely? Inside, I poured another bourbon and stared at the ceiling. Maybe this was my punishment for raising a son who valued inheritance over honor. Maybe I'd spent too much time building walls and not enough time building a man. But as the clock hit midnight, a single thought settled in. This wasn't over. They thought they'd written my ending, but they'd forgotten who wrote the first chapter. I turned on the lamp, opened my old leather ledger, and began flipping through pages, names of suppliers, investors, auditors. I'd built this empire one contract at a time, and I still had the receipts. Literal paper receipts. Hand-signed, time-stamped. Proof that every dollar had been earned clean. If they wanted a war of documents, they were going to drown in evidence. I picked up my wedding ring from the desk and held it between my fingers. "Rose," I whispered, "you always said faith keeps a man standing when the world takes his legs." I hadn't prayed in years, but that night I did. Not for mercy, not for revenge, For clarity. Lord, I said quietly, if this is a test, give me the wisdom to see the trap and the strength to walk right through it. The day I left Dallas, the sky looked like steel. Flat, heavy, unfeeling, just like the people I'd built my empire around. I drove south for 4 hours until the skyline turned to farmland, and the glass towers of the city disappeared in my rearview mirror. The place waiting for me was my late father's ranch outside Austin. 40 acres of oak trees, dust, and silence. The kind of silence that hurts your ears until it starts to heal your mind. I hadn't been there in years, but the old house still smelled like cedar and motor oil. Rose used to hate it out here. Too quiet, she'd say. Now that's exactly what I needed. Quiet to think, quiet to hunt. I spread all the documents across the kitchen table, every accusation, every fabricated transfer. The numbers didn't lie, but someone else's fingerprints were all over them. I started comparing transaction codes from memory. Back in the old days, I used to sign every major payment myself, no software, no auto approval. And here was the first tell, 4 separate transactions listed under my name, executed at 3:07 a.m. on 4 different dates. 3:07 a.m., the same minute. That wasn't human. That was programming. Whoever did this used my digital ID complete with fingerprint verification, but my prints were stored in only 2 places, my secure office vault and my medical file. That's when the pieces clicked. My routine health check last December, Lydia had insisted I do it at her private clinic. She'd even handled the paperwork herself. They hadn't just stolen my signature. They'd stolen my body. I picked up the phone and called the only person I still trusted, June Carver, my accountant, for 25 years. She answered on the second ring, whispering, "Mr. Mallory, you shouldn't be calling me. Evan's people have been monitoring communications." "June." I said, "Just tell me one thing. Did Lydia ever access my medical records?" Silence. Then a slow breath. "Yes." She requested copies under the pretext of estate planning. I didn't think much of it. I rubbed my temples. "And the Cayman transfers, I checked them myself," she said. "They came from your terminal, but the geolocation was off. Pinged from a router in Los Angeles. Lydia's father owned a real estate firm based in LA. There it was. The missing link between my son's ambition and his wife's greed." "June," I said quietly, "thank you. You've done enough. Don't contact me again. For your own safety." When I hung up, I stared at the open laptop. On the screen, my own name blinked beside words like fraudulent, senile, compromised. Senile. That's the story they were spreading. That I was losing my mind. I stood up, walked to the hallway closet, and pulled out an old, fireproof chest. Inside were hundreds of binders paper contracts from the company's first decade. Handwritten notes, blueprints, payment receipts, all in ink. Not a single bite of them existed online. I ran my hand over the first binder, the one labeled 1979-1985. This wasn't nostalgia. It was ammunition. When the law starts to believe you're crazy, there's only one thing that saves you: proof that can't be deleted. I spent the next 12 hours scanning, sorting, indexing. The hum of the old scanner was the only sound in the room. Outside, the sun fell behind the trees, and the Texas night settled thick and warm around the house. At 11:42 p.m., an email arrived from an unknown address. "Mr. Mallory, you don't have to do this. Walk away. For your own sake. No signature. No contact info." But the server trace pointed to Mallory Infrastructure Headquarters. They knew I was digging. I leaned back in the chair and smiled. A slow, deliberate smile, the kind that comes when a hunter realizes the prey has started to feel afraid. "Good," I whispered. "Let them know I'm awake." I stood, poured a glass of water, and stared out the window. The night was black and endless, but the moonlight hit the edge of my old Ford pickup, gleaming like silver armor. Tomorrow, I'd start calling in favors. Because 40 years in business teaches you one truth: the world might forget who you are, but it never forgets who you've helped. And I was about to remind my enemies just how many people still owed me their loyalty. By the following week, I was done hiding. They thought they'd buried me under legal paperwork and lies, but all they'd really done was give me time to reload. I drove into Houston on a Monday morning, wearing the same gray suit I'd worn the day I signed the company's first multi-million-dollar contract. Same suit, same man, just older, quieter, and far more dangerous. My first stop was a quiet diner near Memorial Park. The kind of place where men talked softly and paid in cash. Mark Jensen was already there, stirring his coffee. Mark used to run financial crimes for the FBI before he retired. I'd built the deck on his lake house 20 years ago, wouldn't take a dime from him back then. Now I was calling in that favor. He looked me over. "You look like hell, Richard." "I've been living in it," I said, sliding him a flash drive. "What's this evidence? Not proof yet, but enough to make you curious." He plugged it into his tablet and frowned as data scrolled. Transaction records, forgeries, offshore links tied to Lydia's family trust. "You've been busy," he said. "I had 40 years of boredom to catch up on." Mark leaned back. "If what you're saying's true, they've set you up for a full federal indictment. But this," he tapped the screen, "can turn the tide." "I don't want the tide," I said quietly. "I want the flood." He gave a half smile. "Then you'll need eyes and ears inside your old building." That was the moment the old lion truly woke up. Because if there's one thing I've learned about surviving, whether in business or war, it's that power belongs to those who still know how to hunt. 2 days later, I met my next ally, Angela Cho, a systems analyst who'd worked under me for 15 years before Evan cut her department. She was loyal, brilliant, and most importantly, furious. I found her running a small cybersecurity firm out of a strip mall. "You sure you want to cross your new CEO?" I asked. She smirked. "You taught me how to encrypt revenge, Mr. Mallory." That night, we re-entered the company's internal servers through a dormant maintenance node I'd personally commissioned in 2009, an old security hole nobody remembered, but me. And there it was, a folder labeled Health Trust Account ... docx created by L. Mallory. Inside, forged insurance claims, wire transfers, even a memo from Lydia to a Cayman bank manager. But the goldmine came from the voice recordings. Angela decrypted the company's voice system archive and found fragments, phone calls, conference lines, board sessions. In one, Evan's voice was unmistakable. Once Dad's out of the picture, the inheritance clause triggers automatically. Lydia's father will handle the restructuring. My hand trembled not from age, but from rage. I'd heard men confess to crimes before, but hearing your son plan your funeral while calling it a restructuring, that's a wound you don't recover from, you repurpose it. The next morning, I met Mark again. He'd reviewed everything. "This is organized crime level, Richard. Corporate racketeering, forgery, identity theft." "I know," I said. "Then what's the play? I'm going to let them finish building their empire of lies, and then I'll pull the foundation out from under them." Mark grinned. "You always did like architecture." We shook hands. The deal was clear. He'd quietly coordinate with a few trusted agents, gather more data, and be ready when I called the signal. Meanwhile, I'd play the confused old man. They believed I was docile, defeated, predictable. That night, back at the ranch, I sat on the porch under a Texas sky full of stars. I poured a glass of bourbon and raised it to the heavens. "Lord," I said softly, "I don't ask you to punish them. Just give me time to teach them what punishment looks like." A warm wind moved through the oaks, and for a moment I thought I heard Rose's voice in it. "Justice isn't revenge, Richard. It's setting things back where they belong." Maybe she was right. Maybe justice and revenge sometimes share the same path, they just part ways at the end. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, and smiled. The board thought I was senile. The media thought I was gone. Even my own son thought I was finished. They'd all forgotten one simple rule: the old lion never forgets the sound of footsteps in his territory. And I'd just heard theirs loud and clear. If you're still with me through this storm, type 1 in the comments below. Because from this point on, the fight isn't about money, it's about legacy. By early April, the headlines had cooled down. The scandal was old news. Evan was being celebrated as the young visionary who rescued Mallory Infrastructure from its aging founder. Funny how fast the world forgets the truth when you feed it a good story. But that's the thing about stories, you can always write a sequel. And mine was going to end with justice written in blood and ink. I drove back to Dallas for the first time in 2 months. The city looked different now, colder. My penthouse, once alive with light, was dark, the windows sealed behind mirrored glass. Evan had moved in, of course. He'd redecorated everything: white marble floors, gold accents, abstract art that looked expensive but meant nothing. They'd scrubbed me from my own life. That morning, I met Mark Jensen at a law firm downtown. He brought someone with him, a wiry man in his 50s, with a camera bag and a knowing grin. "Richard, meet Jimmy Lau, former financial forensics at the Bureau. Now he freelances for clients who can afford him." Jimmy shook my hand. "Heard you're looking to play chess with your own son. Mind if I help move the pieces?" He didn't wait for an answer, just pulled out a folder labeled Operation Phoenix. "Here's what we do," he said. "We set up a shell company under your name, something small, boring, and invisible. It'll act as the bait. Lydia and Evan love siphoning money through new subsidiaries. They'll think it's another shell to steal from." I raised an eyebrow. "And when they bite..." Jimmy smiled like a man who's already seen the ending. "We record every keystroke. By the end of that week, Heritage Renewables LLC existed on paper, a fake sustainability startup, supposedly founded by Richard Mallory, using reactivated IDs from my old vendor registry. We populated it with fake staff, fake investors, fake invoices, everything they needed to believe it was real. Angela Cho handled the digital trail, making sure the company's back end appeared connected to my old corporate systems. Mark filed anonymous tips to a few insiders known for gossiping to Lydia's team. Within 48 hours, they'd noticed the bait. "How long before they touch it?" I asked. Jimmy chuckled. "A thief never resists an unlocked door." That night, I sat alone in a rented apartment near the Trinity River watching the security feed Jimmy had set up in my old office. Through hidden cameras, I could see Evan pacing in front of the glass desk I'd imported from Milan 30 years ago. Lydia was beside him, tablet in hand. "There's another dormant subsidiary under Dad's name," she said. "No board listing, no reporting trail." Evan frowned. "Can we access it?" Lydia's smile was sharp. We can access anything. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. They thought they were about to steal from a senile old man. In reality, they were walking straight into a digital snare laced with federal oversight. Because every account, every transfer, every login was being mirrored and time-stamped by Jimmy's encrypted servers and quietly by the IRS Cybercrime Division. 3 days later, the trap snapped shut. At exactly 2:47 a.m., Lydia initiated a $1.6 million transfer from Heritage Renewables LLC to an offshore trust titled Aurora Holdings. I watched it happen in real time, every number, every keystroke. Jimmy nodded at the screen. Got her. Full packet trace. Geo-tagged authenticated. Mark exhaled, and the account owner of Aurora Holdings. He clicked a file. Lydia's passport photo filled the screen. Guess who forgot to use a proxy this time? I leaned back and smiled. You're sure it's enough? Richard Jimmy said you just caught them laundering money in high definition. If we feed this to the feds, they'll need a bigger courtroom. For the first time in months, I slept without bourbon in my veins. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And somewhere deep inside, the soldier in me, the one I'd buried decades ago, finally opened his eyes again. When you fought for your life, once you never forget how to do it again. The next step would be the hardest. Not revenge, not exposure. Something far more dangerous. I was going to make my son trust me again, just long enough for him to hand me the knife himself. Trust is the most dangerous weapon in the world. And sometimes to win, you have to let your enemy believe you're still bleeding. By mid-April, I started calling Evan again. Short, hesitant messages like a father desperate for reconciliation. I made sure my voice sounded tired, fragile. The kind of man who'd given up. He didn't answer at first. Then one evening, he finally picked up. Dad, he said flatly, I'm really busy. I know, son. I just wanted to talk. Maybe make things right. Long silence, then softer, you sound different. I'm getting old, Evan. Fighting doesn't suit me anymore. He bought it. Hook, line, and inheritance. 2 days later, Lydia texted me an invitation. Dinner at the house. Just family. I knew exactly what family meant in her language control. Still I went. The house looked foreign now. Cold lighting, sterile art, no trace of Rose anywhere. Lydia greeted me at the door wearing a silk dress the color of champagne. The air smelled of white truffles and deceit. Richard, she cooed, you look thin. Are you eating well? I've lost my appetite for certain things, I said. Evan stood by the piano, glass of scotch in hand, trying to act casual. Dad, we just want peace, he said. Peace, I smiled. That's a funny word coming from people who started a war. Lydia poured herself wine. Let's not do this tonight. Let's talk about your future. My future. She nodded. You can still be part of the company as a consultant, honorary title, full care package. We'll handle the finances. Ah, there it was. The illusion of mercy. The sweet sound of manipulation disguised as love. I took a sip of my drink and looked straight at my son. Tell me something, Evan. Was it worth it? He frowned. What, trading your integrity for her family's approval, selling your father's name for a seat at their table? His jaw tightened. You don't understand business anymore, Dad. The world's changed. No, I said. You've changed. The world just gave you permission. Lydia rolled her eyes. Honestly, Richard, this self-pity is exhausting. You should be grateful. You get to retire with dignity. I chuckled, low and quiet. If you think this is dignity, you've never seen war. An hour later, they'd both had too much to drink. Evan loosened his tie. Lydia leaned against the marble counter, scrolling through her phone. That's when the storm hit, thunder rolling across the Dallas sky, rain slamming against the glass walls. Power flickered, and for a brief moment, the house went dark. In that darkness, the truth came out. "I'm tired of cleaning up his messes," Lydia hissed. "He should have signed over everything months ago." Evan snapped, "He will, once the case goes through." "And if it doesn't," she shot back. "My father's expecting his cut." "He'll get it," Evan said sharply. As soon as the old man's completely discredited, lightning flashed. For a split second, I saw their faces lit white and merciless like statues of greed. My phone, sitting in my jacket pocket, recorded every word. Crystal clear. When the lights returned, I stood. "I think it's time I go," I said. "Thank you for dinner." Lydia smiled faintly. "We'll talk again soon, Richard." "I'm counting on it." Driving back through the rain, I felt something strange. Not rage, not even satisfaction. Just an old, steady calm. I pulled over under a bridge, played back the recording, and listened to their voices, their arrogance, their certainty. It was all there. Every syllable, every timestamp. I sent the file to Mark and Jimmy. Subject line, confession in the dark. Jimmy replied 2 minutes later. "Got it. Authenticity confirmed. This is enough to bury them." I closed my phone and sat for a long time watching lightning dance across the sky. For the first time in months, I felt peace. "Rose," I whispered, "you were right. Justice and faith, they're two sides of the same coin." Then softly, "Lord, if you're listening, thank you for the storm. Sometimes it takes thunder to reveal the cracks." The next morning, I called Evan, my voice steady. "Son, let's meet tomorrow. Just you and me. No lawyers, no press. I want to end this the right way." He hesitated. "You sure?" "Never been surer." He had no idea what was waiting for him. Because tomorrow the storm wouldn't just be outside, it would be walking right through his door. The next morning I put on my best suit, the midnight blue one Rose bought me for our 40th anniversary. She'd said it made me look like a man who still had something left to prove. Turns out she was right. The city was still wet from the night's storm when I arrived at Mallory headquarters. Same marble lobby, same skyline view. But everything felt smaller now, like the soul had been gutted out of the building. Security looked surprised to see me. "Mr. Mallory," one of them stammered, "you're not scheduled." I smiled. "Relax, son. I'm just here for the show." Upstairs, the boardroom gleamed under bright halogen lights. Evan sat at the head of the long glass table, my chair. Lydia stood beside him, fingers wrapped around a Mont Blanc pen that probably cost more than her conscience. Around them sat 12 board members, men and women I'd hired, mentored, and trusted for decades. Now they stared at me like I was a ghost walking into his own funeral. Dad, Evan said, half rising, "This is a private meeting." "Oh, I know," I said, closing the door behind me. "But since it's my company being sold, I figured I should attend." A ripple of whispers passed around the room. Lydia forced a smile. "Richard, we didn't want to disturb you with business details." "You mean the sale to Axiom Holdings?" I interrupted. "The offshore firm tied to your father's real estate fund in LA. The smile vanished. Her pen froze mid-air. I laid a leather briefcase on the table and clicked it open. Inside, rows of neatly labeled folders and a single tablet glowing blue. Before you sign anything, I said you'll want to see this. Mark Jensen, dressed in a dark suit, stepped through the doorway with Jimmy Lau behind him. This is a closed meeting, Evan snapped. Not anymore, Mark said, flipping open his badge. Federal Consultant, Cybercrime Division. Jimmy set up the tablet and hit play. The boardroom speakers filled with the sound of rain, thunder, and voices. Lydia's voice. Sharp, venomous. He should have signed over everything months ago. Then Evans, he will. Once the case goes through, followed by the damning line, my father's being discredited. My father's finished. The room went dead silent. One of the board members, an older woman named Janet, turned to Evan slowly. "Is that your voice?" she whispered. Evan's face drained of color. "It's out of context." Mark cut him off. "Context won't save you, son. Not when every file, every bank transfer, every forged signature is backed up on federal servers." Jimmy tapped a button. Screens around the room flickered to life, showing charts, dates, transactions, forged authorizations. Then, on the final slide, Lydia's Cayman Islands account, Aurora Holdings, appeared in bold. Amount received $1,640,000, timestamp 2:47 a.m. I stepped forward, voice calm. "You used my signature, my name, my company. You called me senile, unfit, a liability. But tell me something, Evan." I pointed to the figures glowing on the screen. "Does this look like the work of a senile man?" He stood trembling. "Dad, please, no," I said sharply. "You wanted to be the boss, so own your empire. Every dollar, every lie, every crime." Lydia backed toward the wall, eyes darting. "This isn't legal, you hacked us." Jimmy smiled. "Actually, you hacked yourselves. We just hit record." The door burst open. Two agents entered, badges flashing silver under the lights. "Evan Mallory, Lydia Mallory. You're under arrest for corporate fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice." Lydia gasped, mascara streaking down her face. Evan turned to me, desperate. Dad, you can fix this. Tell them it's a misunderstanding." I stared at him, this man I once carried on my shoulders, who used to fall asleep to the sound of my voice reading The Old Man and the Sea. Somewhere in that memory, I found only silence. "No, Evan," I said softly. "You're not my son today. You're just another thief who forgot who taught him to build." He dropped his head, hands shaking as the agents cuffed him. Lydia screamed, "You don't know what you're doing." "Oh, I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. "I'm taking back my name." As they were let out, flashes from reporters outside the glass wall lit the room like lightning. I didn't need to say another word. Justice was already speaking for me. That afternoon, I walked out of the building with Mark beside me. "Hell of a show," he said. "Not a show," I replied. "A reckoning." When we reached the elevator, I looked back one last time at the logo on the wall, Mallory Infrastructure. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. The lion had roared, and the jungle remembered who he was. By the time I reached the parking lot, the press had already turned the building into a zoo. Cameras swarmed, microphones jabbed, voices shouted over one another. "Mr. Mallory, did you plan this sting? Is it true? Your son forged millions under your name? How does it feel to watch your own family fall?" I didn't answer. Some stories don't need to be told twice, they just need to be finished. Mark guided me into his sedan and drove through the back exit. In the side mirror, I caught a glimpse of Evan being loaded into a black SUV, Lydia right behind him. Wrists cuffed, her hair a tangle of rain and tears. It should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt like the end of a war no one really wins. By nightfall, every major outlet was running the story. Mallory scandal explodes. Founder cleared, son and daughter-in-law arrested. Federal investigation uncovers $47 million fraud ring. Cable news played the footage from the boardroom, son's face frozen mid-denial, Lydia's scream echoing through the microphones. Commentators called me the lion who refused to die. I turned the TV off after that. Fame wasn't the goal. Survival was. The next morning, the FBI asked me to come in for a final statement. Agent Maria Santos, short, sharp, all business, sat across from me. "Mr. Mallory, I've worked fraud cases for 20 years, she said. I've never seen someone build such a complete counter-operation on his own. I had help, I told her. And I had motive." She smiled faintly. "We'll be recommending restitution. Everything they took will be restored." "Keep what you need for the victims fund," I said. "Just clear my name." She nodded. "Already done." By evening, I was home again. My real home, the ranch outside Austin. Quiet, simple, honest. When I stepped inside, the air smelled of rain and old wood. I poured a bourbon, sat in Rose's favorite chair by the window, and watched the storm clouds drift away. For the first time in months, the world wasn't spinning. It was still. 2 days later, a courier arrived with a small wooden box. Inside were my personal effects seized during the investigation, my watch, my wedding ring, and a stack of photos they'd taken for evidence. The top photo stopped me cold. It was from the night of the boardroom arrest, me standing under the company logo, the agents behind me, Evan, being led away in cuffs. Someone had captured the exact moment our bloodline broke. I slid the photo into a drawer. Some things don't belong on display. That same afternoon, Mark called. "Results just came in," he said. "You're officially cleared. Lydia's facing 25 to life. Evan's looking at 20 with parole if he cooperates." I said nothing for a long time. "Finally, tell them I don't want restitution. Just make sure the employees keep their jobs. You're a better man than they deserve," he said quietly. Maybe I replied. Or maybe I just know when to stop swinging. That weekend, I returned to Dallas one last time. The building was silent, stripped of chaos. I walked through the lobby, slowly running my hand along the marble wall I'd chosen myself in 1988. Every inch of that place carried fingerprints of who I once was and who I refused to become. In my old office, sunlight fell across the floor. The desk had been cleared, the chairs empty. Only one thing remained, the nameplate they'd removed months ago. Richard Mallory, founder. I picked it up, dusted it off, and whispered, "Welcome home." Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and left for good. Because sometimes to save what you built, you have to walk away from it. That night back at the ranch, I sat on the porch with Mark and Jimmy. We didn't talk about revenge or justice. We just sat there listening to the cicadas hum, the night stretching wide and clean around us. Jimmy finally said, "So what now, old man?" I smiled. "Now I build something that can't be stolen." Mark raised his glass. "To what? To legacy," I said. "And to mercy for those who still have a soul left to save." We drank in silence. The stars were sharp as glass, the air heavy with summer. Tomorrow would bring headlines and lawyers and settlements. But tonight, there was peace, and the faint echo of Rose's laughter somewhere in the wind. 6 months later, Dallas looked different. The headlines had moved on to fresher scandals, the cameras had found new faces to chase, and the name Mallory no longer meant fraud or fortune. It meant rebirth. I was standing on the front steps of the Mallory Legacy Foundation, ribbon in hand, sunlight glinting off the brass plaque beside the door. It read, "Founded by Richard Mallory, protecting the dignity and assets of America's elderly." The crowd gathered below the steps was small but genuine retirees, veterans, single mothers, and a handful of employees who'd stood by me through every storm. No reporters shouting, no lights flashing, just people, real people. I'd spent those 6 months rebuilding what mattered, not glass towers, but trust. With the help of Mark, Jimmy, and Angela, we converted part of my old company's restitution money into a legal defense fund for seniors targeted by financial abuse. We'd already won our first 3 cases: a widow cheated out of her pension, a retired nurse scammed by her own nephew, and a veteran whose daughter forged his mortgage papers. Justice this time wasn't about revenge. It was about protection. When I stepped up to the microphone, I didn't prepare a speech. I just spoke from the place that still ached. 40 years ago, I thought success meant buildings with my name on them. I thought legacy was concrete and glass, but it isn't. The crowd quieted, leaning in. Legacy, I said, is what remains standing when money collapses. It's the way people remember your integrity, not your income. I glanced toward the front row. Angela was there, smiling softly. Mark stood beside her, arms crossed, proud. And behind them in the shade near the fence, a young man lingered, head lowered. Evan. He wasn't supposed to be there. His parole hearing had been only a week ago. I thought I'd never see him again. He looked thinner, older, humbled by consequence. When our eyes met, he didn't wave or speak. He just stood silent, watching. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The crowd, the speeches, even the breeze. All I saw was a boy with scraped knees and a wooden toy bulldozer standing on a job site beside me 40 years ago, saying, "Someday I'll build like you, Dad." And now here we were both still standing, though the house we'd built together had burned down long ago. I didn't stop the ceremony. I didn't call his name, but I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at my son and nodded. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But acknowledgement, a small door opening in a wall of silence. After the ribbon was cut, I walked inside. The air smelled of new paint and cedar, just like the ranch. The foundation's first office was modest framed photos of every person we'd helped line the wall. There was one empty frame waiting, marked "Next Victory." Angela handed me a folder. "Another case came in this morning," she said. "Elder exploitation, similar pattern to yours. Son forging the father's will." I smiled faintly. History doesn't just repeat it, asks if you're ready to answer. "Are you?" she asked. I looked out the window where Evan still stood by the gate, unsure whether to stay or leave. "Yes," I said quietly. "This time I am." That evening, I drove back to the ranch. The sun was melting into the horizon, turning the fields gold. I parked by the porch, grabbed a notebook, and began sketching. Not buildings this time, but a community center for retired builders and engineers, a place where men who'd given their lives to construction could find belonging again. I named it the Rose Center. The first brick would be laid on what would have been her 72nd birthday. I sat back, listening to the cicadas, smiling to myself. People spend a lifetime chasing permanence, but the truth is, permanence lives in kindness, not steel. For the first time in years, I felt my hands steady. The past was behind me, but the purpose was still ahead. And as the last of the daylight faded, I whispered to the quiet evening air, "Rose, we're building again." The wind stirred softly through the trees, and I swear I heard her laugh in it. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new souls to defend. But tonight the world was calm, and justice for once felt like peace. That night after the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. The house was still the kind of stillness you only find after a storm has passed. The foundation's documents lay neatly stacked on my desk, beside an old Bible, its cover worn smooth by Rose's hands. She'd carried it every Sunday, always marking the same verse with a faded ribbon, "Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness." For years, I never understood why that line mattered to her. Now I did. I poured a cup of tea instead of bourbon. The war was over. I didn't need fire in my veins anymore. Outside, the crickets sang their small hymns. A warm wind moved across the Texas fields, soft and clean. I thought about Evan again, how he stood at the fence that afternoon, silent and ashamed. He hadn't asked for forgiveness, and I hadn't offered it. But maybe faith wasn't about erasing pain. Maybe it was about holding it until it no longer ruled you. At 11:42 p.m. the phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Dad." The voice was quiet, shaky. "Evan." He didn't speak for a long time. I heard traffic, then a deep breath. "I went by Mom's grave tonight," he said finally. I wanted to tell her I was sorry. For everything. The words hit like a hammer, not because of what they were, but because I knew how hard they must have been to say. "Did you?" I asked softly. "Yes," he said, "and I wanted to tell you too. I don't expect you to forgive me, I want to do something good again." I stared out the window. The moon hung low over the pasture, pale as old marble. "Then start with honesty," I said. "That's the only brick that holds." He sniffed, trying to keep his voice steady. "The parole board approved work release. If you'll have me, I'd like to volunteer at the foundation. No money, no title. Just work." The silence stretched thick as summer air. Then I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. "Come Monday," I said. 7 a.m. sharp. And Evan leave the suit at home. We work with our hands here. He laughed once, a real laugh, small but alive. "Yes, sir." When I hung up, I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness, not yet, but the space where forgiveness might live someday. And maybe that was enough for now. The next morning, I rose before dawn. The sky over Austin was painted in bruised pink and gold, the kind of sunrise that reminds you the world starts over every day, whether you're ready or not. I brewed coffee, opened Rose's Bible, and reread the note she'd scribbled in the margin years ago. "Justice without grace is vengeance. Grace without justice is weakness. Walk the line between them." That line had once sounded poetic. Now it sounded like a blueprint, the only one worth following at 74. I drove to the foundation early. The halls still smelled of fresh paint and cedar. Angela was already there, half asleep over a stack of paperwork. "Morning, boss," she murmured. "Morning," I said. "We've got a new volunteer starting Monday. Anyone I know?" "Yeah," I said. "My son." She looked up, surprised, then nodded slowly. "Then I guess miracles come in all shapes." "Maybe they do," I said, and smiled. That evening, I walked the property line of the ranch. The sun dipped behind the trees, turning everything to amber. I stopped by the small garden where Rose's roses still grew wild, untamed, but alive, just like her. Kneeling, I pulled a few weeds, then whispered, "Rose, he's coming home." A warm breeze swept through the leaves, brushing against my face like an answer. I looked up at the horizon, one more day, ending, one more chance, beginning. And I realized something simple: faith isn't built in churches or boardrooms. It's built in quiet places, in the spaces between ruin and repair, when a man chooses to stand up one more time. At 74, I had everything money couldn't buy: peace, purpose, and the slow healing of a heart that had been torn open but never truly broken. I went inside, sat at my desk, and wrote the Foundation's mission statement in bold letters across the first page: to protect the dignity, freedom, and faith of those who refuse to be forgotten. When I finished, I leaned back, closed my eyes, and smiled. Because after all the noise, the pain, and the betrayal, what remained wasn't revenge, it was redemption. And that, I realized, is what faith really is. If you believe that no matter how late it comes, justice and faith always find their way, share this story. Follow Brian's Stories for more true-to-life tales of redemption, resilience, and the quiet victories that remind us why we keep fighting. Because sometimes the loudest miracles happen in silence.